The history of the last 200 years shows that Russia or the Soviet Union can defeat the greatest enemies, like Napoleon or Hitler, but can be defeated by an enemy that is significantly weaker than Russia, such as Japan in 1905 or Chechnya in the 1990s. The Russian Federation is the largest country in the world, with vast natural resources across its territory. It is also a country that has always been populous and capable of enduring prolonged conflicts. During the Soviet era, certain military technologies were developed, making Russian weaponry the best in certain areas, which provides them with significant advantages. A pattern observed with Russia is that it can enter a war with any power in the world, provided that its leadership is strong enough to endure prolonged and exhausting conflicts. During World War II, Nazi Germany was more technologically advanced, and the German army was more disciplined and dedicated, yet that was not enough to defeat the Soviet Union at the time. The reason for the Soviet Union's victory lies in the fact that the leadership of the USSR and Stalin were strong enough that even the German war machine couldn't overcome them. During the Napoleonic Wars, France and its allies attacked Imperial Russia. At that time, France had the best army, more advanced weaponry, a massive force, and better commanders led by Napoleon, yet that was still not enough. The reason for Napoleon's defeat was that the Russian emperor, along with his military commanders, was sufficiently resolute. A particularly interesting conflict was the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856. At that time, most of the West, together with the Ottoman Empire, was aligned against Russia, which found itself without allies. As long as Tsar Nicholas I Pavlovich was in power, the West couldn't break Russia. The moment the Tsar died and a new, less resolute emperor took the throne, Russia accepted defeat, even though it could have continued the war. In 1905, Japan defeated Russia in a brief war fought in the Far East. Although Russia could have waged a longer war, brought in more modern ships, and additional manpower, they chose to end the conflict and accept defeat because Russia was weak and facing unrest in its largest cities. In World War I, Russia entered the conflict against the Central Powers. The Russian army was not prepared for the modern warfare of that time against Germany, and was inferior in direct confrontations. But this was not the reason for Russia's defeat. The cause of Russia's defeat was the collapse of leadership and the revolution in the capital. The Winter War with Finland in 1939 was extraordinary in that the massive Soviet Union was initially defeated on the ground, but the leadership was determined to win, and ultimately they did. The war in Afghanistan was exhausting for the Soviet Union. It was a reason for the stagnation of the Soviet economy and accelerated the eventual dissolution of the USSR and its social system. The war was grueling, but despite the losses, the Soviets were winning on the ground, and had the leadership been determined not to end the war, the Soviets could have won in Afghanistan. The First Chechen War, where the powerful Russian army lost to a much smaller Chechnya without a regular army, occurred because the state was weak and the leadership under Boris Yeltsin was indecisive about securing a victory. We could analyze other conflicts, but these examples illustrate one clear rule. Russia does not lose wars because its enemies are strong, but because it is weak due to internal crisis and power struggles. If we apply this rule to the current war in Ukraine, it suggests that unless there is internal collapse within the Russian Federation, Russia has little chance of losing the war. Of course, the war cannot last indefinitely, but Russia will not accept the outcomes of a peace agreement unless it aligns with their goals. Many Western analysts believe that Russia's weak point was its economy, and that imposing sanctions would break the Russian Federation and lead to an economic collapse, sparking protests within Russia and resulting in Putin's ousting. At this moment, this scenario seems unlikely because, after the events of 2014, the Maidan, and the beginning of the civil war in Ukraine, Russia realized that war with the West was inevitable. The question then was whether Russia would start the war in 2014 or delay it. Since 2014, Russia has strengthened its economy, boosted food production, and solidified alliances. The Russian Federation has done everything possible to avoid economic collapse, which so far has proven successful. Russia is politically stable, as evidenced by the March 2024 elections, where Putin secured a record victory. It's also important to note that the Russian opposition largely supports the policies implemented by Putin, which means the country is united around the objectives of the war in Ukraine. A very important factor for the Russian economy is the price of oil and gas. If the price of energy were to drop significantly, it would cause major problems for the Russian economy. However, the war in Ukraine, sanctions on Russia, and the situation in the Middle East have driven up energy prices, benefiting the Russian economy. Another important factor is military resources. Russia possesses large-scale production facilities for military equipment, and as we can see, they have allies who are willing to supply them with weapons. This is an unexpected factor for Western analysts and demonstrates that the global situation is more favorable for Russia than anticipated. So let's try to answer the question, how long can Russia continue the war? The answer is simple. Russia could wage war for years, as long as Putin is willing to lead it. This gives Russia significant advantages, and the reason lies in the steadfastness of its leadership.